The brain is very permeable pre-puberty and puberty going through adolescence. So that's why we see it more in kids. Why is strep that should be just in the gut and taken care of with an antibiotic? Why is it crossing the blood-brain barrier? Why is it seemingly not reacting to antibiotics half the time? And why, or even asymptomatic, why is our immune system not recognizing it as a problem? They should have a high fever. They should have a sore throat. They should have a really bad stomach ache. Some kids can clear it fine, and other kids are not clearing it. And that's when we're seeing these psychiatric symptoms.
Welcome to This Way Up. We are bringing you engaging, informative, and inspiring conversations surrounding all aspects of mental health from the perspective of us as parents and caregivers. I'm Andrea Nanigian.
And I'm Emmy Waters. When someone you care about is struggling with their mental health, this can be an incredibly stressful and challenging time. So we're here to provide valuable resources to support you as you navigate this journey.
Today's guest, Jennifer, a psychotherapist and mother, sheds light and information on a fairly unknown disorder, PANS or PANDAS, which is brought on by inflammation in our bodies. And what she has uncovered in her intense research will open your eyes into how the many things we expose ourselves to on a daily basis is wreaking havoc on our health.
Yes, she's a wealth of information. We're able to ask all of our burning questions, learn about new healing modalities, alternative therapies, genetic testing, nutrition. I just feel like we got to ask everything we've been wondering.
You know, Emmy, I wish that I would have taken notes. And if I can recommend to any of your listeners, grab a piece of paper and a pen because you're going to want to jot down some of what she's teaching.
Absolutely. All right, let's meet Jennifer.
Jennifer Kozek is a mother, wife, board-certified psychotherapist, and internationally recognized blogger, advocate, and national speaker. Jennifer has seen the anxiety and the autism epidemic unfold in her private practice and has watched the harmful impact of medication on many young clients. The ADHD epidemic turned personal when Jennifer's young son was diagnosed. She plunged into the world of safe and natural healing modalities outside of the pharmaceutical model. She is the author of a 5-time award-winning book, Healing Without Hurting, and she also co-authored a book titled Brain Under Attack, a resource for parents of children with PANS and PANDAS. She's been featured in documentaries, on many podcasts, news stories, and her articles appear in many publications. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here today. So, Jennifer, you are a psychotherapist practicing in a very traditional Western medicine environment. Will you tell us how you started down the path of looking at inflammation and root causes of many of the mental health issues that are wreaking havoc on our kids today?
When I had my own children, that was when I started to question what mainstream medicine was doing and whether or not this was going to really work for my kids, because I saw all these kids with side effects, and they'd have side effects and they'd be on medications for more stuff for the side effects of the side effects. I mean, it was just, and then they needed a medication for sleep because then they couldn't sleep. And then basically, that's kind of how I kind of got into all of this. So I started just questioning this whole narrative when I would see 5-year-old kids being put on antipsychotic medication.
What?
Like as young as 5. Yeah. And so we just started going down this rabbit hole. So PANS and PANDAS, is recognized as more of a psychiatric illness, but a lot of our kids with autism, it's very overlapping. And I truly believe, like in the book that I co-wrote called Brain Under Attack, we speak about the fact that there is such an overlap between autism and PANS and PANDAS that we would think that PANS and PANDAS is one of the underlying reasons for autism.
Really?
No kidding.
Yeah, that it's all one in the same umbrella, which is basically autoimmune dysfunction. So what I've discovered was that autism is immune dysfunction, metabolic dysfunction, as well as, so it's immunologic, digestive, and metabolic. So we recognize that these children have leaky guts or inflammation in the gut that affects the brain. We understand now that the vagus nerve goes between the gut and the brain back and forth, and that's our second brain. And so if our gut's inflamed, our brain is going to be inflamed. And so if we have an inflammation in the brain, we're going to have, in some cases, tics. We're going to have social deficits. We're going to have psychiatric issues for some kids. Some kids on the autistic spectrum really don't have any behavioral problems at all. It's just really how much the toxins have affected them and how much inflammation they have, where in the brain they have this inflammation, because, the machine, it's a machine at the end of the day. So this is why some kids have more of a learning deficit. We see some kids on the autistic spectrum that seem to have more of a social deficit. So again, I think it's just a long spectrum, including the ADHD kids that usually don't get umbrellaed in to this spectrum. In my mind, it's all the same spectrum. So it's just the severity of the side effects or the symptoms of the condition. And OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And when you look at obsessive compulsive disorder, you're also looking at PANS and PANDAS. It's a very strong correlation between kids that have PANS or PANDAS. And to clear that up, PANS is the overarching name for PANS. So PANDAS was first discovered because of a psychiatric illness due to a strep infection. Now we call it PANS because it's all encompassing. It could be a strep infection. It could be Lyme disease, Bartonella, Babesia. Now we can add COVID to the list. So we have all these people now, adults with long haul COVID, and they basically have PANS.
What does PANS stand for?
So pediatric autoimmune encephalitis, which is brain inflammation.
So adults could now have this too, even though it's labeled as PANS?
As for pediatrics. But, now we're seeing long haul COVID labels more, or people just get diagnosed with depression, anxiety, fibromyalgia, because it also can cause a lot of, not only psychiatric symptoms, but also physical symptoms. It could cause some, juvenile arthritis. I know a PANS kid that was diagnosed with juvenile arthritis, and he didn't have juvenile arthritis, he had PANS, but it could affect the joints. It's inflammation. So it just depends where the body wants to react to it, if that makes sense.
It does.
Wow, Andrea.
I know. I'm like, I want to ask about the OCD, but there's so much other things on this. But I want to first clarify. So on a root level, PANS is a lot of disorders that are tied to inflammation.
Yes. Along with the autism.
Brain inflammation.
Yeah.
And gut microbiome.
And gut microbiomes and the gut and brain being intimately connected.
Which comes first?
That's a good question. I mean, we can, like a mainstream doctor will recognize that if you're anxious, that you might get a headache or your stomach might hurt.
Right.
I mean, and but they can't admit that if your stomach's hurting, that could give you a headache or brain fog or whatever. So they recognize it from one side to the other, but not from the other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they'll be like, oh yeah, you're really anxious, but they won't recognize that if your stomach's hurting, you'll be anxious. So it's very interesting. They're very slow to catch up for what moms now know, right? So we know because we do the research. We know because we find the doctors that listen to us, that believe us. When we tell them our children's symptoms, we think it's autoimmune. My pediatrician literally laughed at me and told me it was a very interesting story when I started explaining my 9-year-old and what was happening to her. Oh, that's a very controversial diagnosis is the answer I got.
Yeah. I can tell you from personal experience, PANDAS is absolutely real. I mean, it was like a light switch went off in my son.
Yes.
1 week he was sick and we think it was with strep. He has asymptomatic strep. The next week he had OCD symptoms that had never shown up before. And then it went so fast. I mean, it was within weeks that he was to a place where he almost had to be hospitalized because the OCD had gotten so bad. So this was 11 years ago, and it was, no one knew about it at that point. And we were just figuring it out and trying to really fix his OCD.
At what point did he develop those symptoms compared to when he had strep?
Within a week.
He got strep. You knew he had strep. And then a week later, he had true mental health symptoms.
And the reason why this is so clear is one, because it was so sudden, but it was on his birthday and he was really sick and he just slept. And that's how I get when I get strep. So I am a carrier of strep, but I don't actually normally have I'm asymptomatic.
Yeah, because your immune system is just doing a better job regulating itself. That's the difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we didn't actually know he had strep. We're assuming now that he had strep. Then the next weekend he had a soccer tournament and he started to, after every goal, he would scrape his hand on the ground. And this is a kid that was just like any other typical kid out there. He played competitive soccer. He was really rational. He was, everything about him just you would have never pegged as being unusual, right? Like there was nothing that said, what's going on here? Him doing that was unusual. We saw I'm not kidding you, my parents came in a couple of weeks later, and within a couple of weeks, everything had to be, even he was having complete meltdowns, especially when something wasn't going when we interrupted that thought process. And so we were like, whoa, we thought he had first had like some sort of a brain tumor or something.
Yeah. Or concussion
Oh, I've done the MRIs, believe me.
Yes, we do too.
So I'm like, oh, Miss Holistic over here is missing like a very important thing. I mean, thank God it wasn't that, but I get it.
But that's what you think because it's so unusual, right? You're like, what is going on here? And this was all around the holidays.
How old was he, Andrea?
He was 11.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's about the onset. So just to talk about that for a second. Yeah. So the brain is very permeable pre-puberty and puberty going through adolescence. So that's why we see it more in kids. Plus, I think the chemical load has grown so substantially from when we were children that I think that's contributing to it. But again, why is it crossing the blood-brain barrier? Why is strep that should be just in the gut and taken care of with an antibiotic? Why is it seemingly not reacting to antibiotics half the time? And why, or even asymptomatic, why is our immune system not recognizing it as a problem? They should have a high fever. They should have a sore throat. They should have a really bad stomach ache. Some kids can clear it fine, and other kids are not clearing it. And that's when we're seeing these psychiatric symptoms. But yeah.
I don't remember hearing anything about this when we were kids.
No, there wasn't this when we were. Well, asthma, allergies, diabetes, and young 5-year-old children. No, we didn't see. We had one kid maybe in the whole school that had a peanut allergy, and that was it. When I wrote my book, Healing Without Hurting, I interviewed a school nurse that had been a school nurse for 45 years. And I said, can you explain to me the experience of being a school nurse, back in 1975 and now? And she basically said that all she did was hand out Band-Aids to children in 1975. And by the time she retired in 2013 or whatever it was, she had a wall of EpiPens, a wall of antipsychotic medication, a wall of ADHD medication, inhalers, the whole 9 yards. She looked like a pharmacy in her office. And she said the amount of food allergies and asthma had skyrocketed. And so, she couldn't understand why. So yes, something has seriously changed. And it's very sad that we don't acknowledge it. The media doesn't acknowledge, no one acknowledges it. The doctors don't acknowledge it. They don't get schooled in this. They don't want to talk about what's causing it.
So what has changed fundamentally?
So, well, lots of things. So of course it's lots of things. So we can't pinpoint it on one thing. And I think that's, upsetting because then we can't be like, well, it's just this. So, well, first of all, in 1975, whatever, I had 5 vaccines my entire childhood. So a vaccine is designed to create an autoimmune reaction on purpose, to create antibodies. But what happens now, our schedule went from 5 vaccines. Now kids have 72 shots. That's before COVID.
What?
Yeah. 75 vaccines. Yes. At every well visit, they get 2 or 3 shots or more. And each of those vaccines now are combined vaccines. So like diphtheria, tetanus, so you're really getting like 10 shots in one day. So, and then the kid becomes listless. The parents take them to the ER. They said, oh, you're just having it's viral. Well, yeah, it's viral because you just injected 17 viruses into this kid in the last 24 hours. And then you have the adjuvants. You have the peanut oil that we believe is in vaccines, which might be why we have so many peanut allergies. The aluminum, the mercury, the formaldehyde, the monkey cells. And so, we don't know what damage this is all doing collectively. It's just a little crazy. So that's one thing. For sure, what happens when we're artificially causing the immune system to overreact on purpose 73 times? An autoimmune condition? Possibly. And now we're not only seeing it in children in this kind of capacity, we're seeing a huge rise in adults with autoimmune conditions. arthritis and Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease and lupus and all of these other conditions, fibromyalgia, which no one's even ever heard of before, chronic fatigue syndrome. So yeah, I think we're doing ourselves in with that. And then we have things being sprayed in our air. When we look into the air, then we look at the amount of chemicals in our food supply that is not allowed in many other countries. So there's many, many assaults to the immune system. Our good gut bacteria is being destroyed by pesticides. The amount of pesticides we're all eating, glyphosate, all the things that were being sprayed on all our food is killing our good gut bacteria, which is destroying our immune system. The list goes on and on and on and on. And all the processed food and all the chemicals that are, being put in those foods aren't really food. So it's a combination, I think, of just assault after assault after assault after assault. So when we get a cold, all of a sudden people can't react appropriately to it. Either the body doesn't recognize, because I know when my daughter gets sick, my PANS girl, when she gets sick with something, I might get some blood work for her and her white blood cell count isn't even elevated. It should be elevated. Like she had mycoplasma pneumonia and her white blood cells weren't even going up. I'm like, what is wrong with this picture? The immune system's not appropriate.
It's almost confused as to what it's supposed to be doing.
It's very confused. It gets overexcited for things it shouldn't be excited about and underexcited about things it should, deal with. Because truthfully, like even take COVID, it's everywhere, right? The spike protein, whatever this is everywhere in the world. We're carrying it right now in our bodies, all of us. And so when we get sick with it, it just means that something happened to our immune system and now our bodies are trying to detox it out. We get the high fever, we get sick, but viruses and stuff are everywhere. It's just why are their immune systems so dysregulated that the immune system, like we all have Lyme disease. I have Lyme disease. We probably all have it, but why am I able to have zero symptoms, asymptomatic, don't have any problems with it? It's because my immune system is doing what it's supposed to do. Cancer cells, we all have them, but our immune systems are constantly fighting them off. So, we stay healthy, we exercise, we try to eat healthy. Hopefully we don't turn that on and hopefully we stay healthy and don't get cancer. But that's harder and harder to achieve when we have things in the air and the food supply and all of the things that are coming at us all the time. Our bodies can't keep up with that detox. And then it's also shutting our detox pathways down. So not only are we taking in all these toxins, but the glyphosate alone shuts down our glutathione, shuts down our detox pathway. So when our pathways are disrupted, we talk about metabolic issues. We talk about epigenetics. Right? It's not only our genetics, which either protect us or don't, depending, but it's epigenetic. So we're getting a lot of genetic mutation, which is not natural. It's happening because of the amount of toxicity in our world. So it's a whole bunch of reasons why our kids and us are starting to really be affected by all this.
It's kind of conflicting because you go back hundreds of years where everything was pure. Right? Pretty much pure. And we didn't live longer because we were affected by so many of the elements and things out there. So then humans come in and come up with all of these great ways to help us live longer. But in the end, we're living longer, but in some cases sicker.
Yes. And I think that the age is starting to come back the other way. Like, I think we got to a point where most people in America were living at 82 and now it's like 69. Like people will say all the time, well, back in the 1920s, people died young and there was a lot of infant deaths. We didn't have all these vaccines. But, we forget that in history, we've had issues of high radiation that was thrown on the people. We've had issues where DDT was a pesticide, was being sprayed in classrooms in the 1940s or 30s, whatever it was, in order to, kill bacteria. So it's not that in history we never had a lot of these issues. We also had poor nutrition in a lot of areas and poverty. We also had dirty water where we would get parasitic infections and things like that. So we've really cleaned up a lot. So of course they want to blame vaccines for why people got healthier. Nobody ever got healthier with vaccines. Cleaning up the water supply, increasing our food, even though processed food is no good, they fortify it, right? We understand like the measles virus is actually cured with vitamin A. So we knew these things. And the only reason people died, in my opinion, is because we didn't have the diagnostic tools that we have today. So if we have the diagnostic tools of today and the medicine of yesterday, which was herbs and healthier food and all those things, we would be a lot healthier today.
Oh, that is so interesting. You know what my frustration is, and I do align with some of those natural remedies and different healing modalities, but I sometimes feel like I'm fighting my own children to say, you know, let's look at root cause. Let's look at your food. Let's look at all these other things. And I'll say this is my belief system from trial and error, from being healed myself in different ways, but trying to convince my kids sometimes, or even their dad, that no, this is the healing route that makes sense because of a lot of those things you just said. Sometimes because the traditional path isn't offering any help, that's really working. I feel like even my kids are more trained to this traditional, what's my label? Tell me what my condition is and give me a pill, the medication to feel better. And then when that doesn't help, that's when shit hits the fan and I try to go, natural medicine, whatever, but then I can't get the buy-in, right? Because we're so conditioned culturally.
Well, what's interesting is modern medicine's too only been around 100 years. Before that, we had all these healing modalities that started getting phased out when the Rockefellers came in and brought their petrochemical substitutes for natural remedies. And most people don't realize that, like, for example, Tamiflu, which has a million side effects and black warnings on it, like not to take it because it could cause seizures in adolescents, suicidality, the whole 9 yards. The active ingredient in that is actually star anise. Chinese star anise is the active ingredient in Tamiflu. So maybe we should all be taking Chinese star anise instead. But it is hard people have to educate themselves, and they don't want to, because the big machine has spent the last 100 years convincing everybody that their medicine is God. It's literally a God. It's literally indoctrinated into everybody. And so it's like, oh, you're not on 3 medications? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, it's like a problem. Like, my aunt's 80 years old and she's not on 1 medication because she's all into all of this. They think we're crazy.
The other thing is it takes effort.
It does. Well, and I think that's one of the biggest things is that it takes effort, and, it is expensive.
Yes.
Insurance isn't covering a lot of it.
Yes.
Right. They've created the system around the convenience and the, quick fix, but people don't recognize it doesn't fix anything. It's just suppressing a symptom. So people like with chronic, say arthritis, they take ivermectin. They take that like a low dose for the rest of their lives. Ivermectin is an anti-parasitic. Those in functional medicine start recognizing that arthritis is very much a parasitic infection. So the meds are just doing just enough to keep it at bay, but not to heal you.
Can you say that again about arthritis and a parasite? Is that what you said?
Yeah. So one possible, because it's not everyone, maybe, right? But one possible underlying condition that causes arthritis is parasites.
Wow.
Or bacteria, or, some kind of viral influence. And and it's interesting because viruses need a host. Parasites need a host. What's a virus? Is a virus a parasite?
Interesting.
It's interesting. We don't think about these things in this context. And so ivermectin was helping people during COVID because COVID was parasitic in nature. And that's why it was helping. So it was also attaching itself to nicotine receptors. And that's a whole nother conversation about what is COVID, what is it, and why is it affecting so many people and causing inflammation. So it was almost like a match that was lit on people that were very vulnerable, that already had some underlying autoimmune something happening. We're seeing long haul COVID. We're seeing people really having bad symptoms because it's the inflammatories that woke up the parasites, woke up the mold, woke up everything that's causing these issues. So mold and yeast, we can add that to the list of what causes PANDAS, or all these physical symptoms in us, but everyone's different. So like I might have joint pain, you might have chronic headaches, and Andrea might have some other symptom. And so nobody's pinpointing what is actually causing these things.
So you've got a child that you're suspecting something is going on.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd be curious as to, I know what I saw, but what are some things that parents can look for that would raise the red flag? And then what do they do? If their pediatrician isn't accepting it, what's the next step for a parent if they start suspecting that maybe their child is having an autoimmune reaction to something?
Yeah. So, if we go back to autism, right? A loss of eye contact, motor skill problems, inattention. I mean, there's a difference between a kid that won't sit in their seat because they're 5 and a kid that can't focus on anything, can't do anything, is getting headaches all the time, chronic stomach aches, red ears, allergies. You know, a lot of kids have sensitivities to foods, to environmental things. So that's all a warning sign physically that something is brewing. Somebody that's chronically sick, a child that's sick every other day. And like, I remember always thinking like, oh, my kids are in daycare and both my kids were preemies. So the pediatrician just kept saying, oh, they're always going to have less than perfect immune systems. Now that I know what I know, I wish I would have done a lot of things differently. So you'll start seeing those types of symptoms. Shyness, right? There's shyness and there is separation anxiety galore, right? So like my daughter, so you talk about, Andrea, the sudden onset of an OCD. And very often we will see that explosive sort of onset. When my daughter developed it, her OCD turned into anorexia. Like she couldn't eat anything or drink anything. And she said that something in her mind was telling her not to. So we're also seeing anorexia as a symptom. And so I've tried to educate, therapists like myself that work with eating disorders. I'm like, you better start looking at PANDAS as a possible underlying cause, because it's not always what we think it is. It could be depression for some kids. Sometimes it's anxiety. Sometimes it's ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. So of course, we're so quick to just label it as these things, put them on meds. And interesting, there was a study done a couple years ago, of course, out of Holland or somewhere, that looked at psychiatric medication. And they discovered that it had nothing to do with neurotransmitters. And that wasn't what was helping. What was helping is the mechanism of antidepressants and antipsychotics is it's an anti-inflammatory.
Oh, no kidding.
Yep.
Really?
So why it helps some people is because it also acts as an anti-inflammatory. Same thing with antibiotics. Antibiotics are hugely beneficial for inflammation. So people get put on it, not only is it like killing the bugs, but it's also killing your good bugs, but it actually has a mechanism of anti-inflammatory. So unfortunately, I see a lot of kids with PANDAS go to functional medicine doctors and get put on years of antibiotics. I see it. So there's many different schools of thought too on how to treat this and who to see. Like when you ask, like, who do you go to see? What do you do? Well, there are functional medicine doctors. They're called Lyme literate doctors, if someone wanted to Google that. They are usually MDs or DOs, doctors of osteopathic medicine, or medical doctors. And very often the ones that are Lyme literate are PANDAS literate, basically. And even if they're not Lyme literate, but they understand the mechanism of autoimmune issues and like they can address it holistically and like Western and Eastern, a lot of them will combine. Some of them will maybe put a child on an antibiotic for 2 or 3 rounds, but then switch to herbs and send you to the herbalist. I love those practices because in my mind, yes, we need to like address the acuteness of something, but then we need to like really start healing the immune system, getting the microbiome back, detoxing the person, like all the things. And there's always 2 schools of thought. Of course, Western medicine is kill, kill, kill. Kill the parasite, kill the mold, kill the yeast. Where Eastern medicine is more about build the immune system so that the immune system does this on its own.
Right.
So with some support. So we might have to support the detox pathway. We may need to support the inflammation in the gut. We may need to support the microbiome so that the body does what it's supposed to do. So there's lots of ways to treat this. There's lots of different avenues to treat it. There's a lot of different people that have very different opinions on how to treat PANDAS and PANDAS. I personally try to stay away from Western medicine as much as I can. Naturopathic physicians understand how to treat this. A lot of chiropractors, depending on what state people are in. Sometimes the naturopaths are not licensed in a particular state, so they actually have to work under a DO or an MD, or they kind of work under the radar and they work with practitioners or labs and things that are out of state. So it just depends on the practitioner. It depends on the state that someone is living in, how easy or not easy it is to find practitioners that work this way. The good news with telehealth now, though, is there are more and more practitioners that will do this type of Zoom call or whatever and address it with you, order the tests, because they work with a lot of independent labs. For example, my daughter we did a mycotoxin test, right? we discovered there was definitely some Lyme toxicity. And so we had to do a urine test. We had to send it out to a special lab because mainstream doctors' labs are not testing for this type of thing. But that's, I think, the best course of action.
So you've got a parent who traditionally can go to their insurance company, get a list of doctors. They have a place to go.
Yeah.
And you're saying in some states, naturopaths can't even get licensed.
Right.
How do you, as a parent, what are the resources to go find somebody who is legitimate, who is, in this for the right reason, who is educated in it?
Well, I think personally one of the best ways, and I hate Facebook, but I have to say the Facebook groups on PANS and PANDAS have been instrumental to me and many other families on what works, what doesn't. We share practitioners, information. We talk about the treatments. I mean, obviously, you're going to see varying opinions on how to treat it. Like you said, Andrea, when you said, you didn't know if you should take your son to a doctor. What's the scariest and most heartbreaking thing for me about this is when we're in this crisis mode, we don't have anywhere to go.
Exactly.
Right. And so it's a very scary thing when your kid is in crisis. They're suicidal. What are you supposed to do? Sometimes we have no choice. I say, go to the hospital. Don't talk vaccines. Don't talk PANS. Don't just say, you don't know what's wrong with your kid. They'll say, oh, okay, very compliant family. They get put on a med, fine, whatever, leave the hospital and then deal with it. And sometimes the med could actually be helpful. So, sometimes it's necessary. So it's never to say never mainstream medicine, because I think it has its place always. But hopefully, if you start seeing signs, if these parents start seeing signs, like before it gets to an emergency crisis situation, I would highly recommend trying to find functional doctors, MDs, DOs, naturopathic physicians, get on chats, figure it out, and try to get help before it gets worse.
Curating these valuable conversations is really about our shared passion for promoting mental wellness. Behind the scenes, however, there are several platforms and systems that help us bring these episodes to you.
If you found value in our conversations and feel inspired to support, please consider making a donation. Whether it's the price of coffee or wine or more, your contribution directly supports our ability to keep connecting, sharing, and growing with you. Please visit our website at thiswayuppodcast.com to support this community. We thank you and we appreciate you.
Andrea and Jennifer, I feel like it's worth mentioning because people who will be listening might have different sensibilities or belief systems around how they seek care. And I think, curious what you guys think, I think there's so much information. We know so much more, and information is available in a different way these days, through social media and whatnot. So we got a lot coming in. I think it's led to people developing a very personal belief system about their nutrition, how they're going to seek care. Do they align with their MD? Do they align with the natural medicine doctor? Which is great. Obviously, it's your body, and you seek care in the way you see makes most sense for you. But Jennifer, I'm curious, in your practice as a psychotherapist, when people are coming to you, likely they're coming for the mental health aspect. How do you incorporate in your practice these sensibilities towards natural medicine and making those unique connections, body and mind, for people? How do you address that in your practice?
So a lot of people find me because of the work I do, and they come and the first thing they say is, oh, I'm so glad a therapist that doesn't want me on medication right away.
Yes.
So they find me that way. And, I think energetically I put that out into the universe, and that's what comes back to me mostly. But then I do have people that are very mainstream. They've been on psych medication forever, and I have to walk lightly. And I have good boundaries as much as I can. But then sometimes I just share my story.
Do either of you know, in order for an MD or a nurse practitioner to call themselves functional doctor, is that regulated? Is somebody monitoring? Is there a certification that they have to be able to say that?
That's a really good question. I have no idea. I've never looked into what makes somebody, I know a DO versus an MD. A DO is definitely more into the holistic realm, and they're looked at the same in medicine. mostly. I'm sure there's some MDs that would disagree with that statement. But yeah, I think in order to be like more functional medicine, like they do usually go on and get a functional medicine certificate, or, they go beyond the regular MD schooling. It's very fascinating. When I was writing my book, Healing Without Hurting, I found a medical book from 1865, I want to say, or in the late 1800s, that was in my basement because it was my husband's great-great-grandfather's book, because he was in medicine doing something. And in the book was every single remedy that we've used for my children. So the doctors of yesterday, they knew all of this. They knew all of it. But somehow that's gone out the window. It's just fascinating that the doctors knew this. Like, they knew how to treat people, like from a systems biology approach. So the belief is that every organ, every system of the body is intimately connected.
Yes,
the problem with Western medicine is that everyone's looking at one organ at a time, which is ridiculous because it doesn't work that way.
Right.
I mean, so I go to the gastroenterologist when Evan was 5, and I said, could gluten be causing some of his spaciness? And, oh, we checked for celiac. He doesn't have that. So I go to a naturopath. They test him for gluten. He's very gluten sensitive, dairy sensitive, egg sensitive. We pull the foods, we heal the gut, and all of a sudden he's talking more, his mood's better. I'm like, well, because we reduced inflammation is really what we did. And all of a sudden the symptoms start improving miraculously.
That was what moved the needle for me. And I guess like anything, the proof is in the pudding. I think when people have the personal experience that something helped for them, then they are more likely to accept in a lot of cases. But actually the gluten thing, what really turned my head, because I grew up as a very sick kid and debilitating stomach things, had every test. Nobody ever knew what it was. And as an adult, even until I made a new friend and she said something about gluten, I just tried it and my whole world changed. And that's when I really knew, food as medicine was a different way to go.
Yeah.
Emmy, though, it gets back to your point with the kids, is everything that's readily available to them has gluten in it.
Yeah.
And we get into, you can control what your kids eat when they're young, but once they hit that teenage years, it's more difficult. And how do you get them to pay attention to that in a world where it's not important to them?
Right.
I have an 18-year-old daughter. Just yesterday, we went to the doctor because she was having such severe stomach issues. We're finally doing the elimination diet. And I've got her, she's like, okay, it hurts so bad that I want to fix it. And I was like, I think other things are going to be fixed once you start cleaning up your diet. But it's hard unless there's...
You can't make them.
You can't.
They got to want it for themselves.
I mean, I was fortunate that I found this type of thing when my kids were 6 and 5 when we started all of this. And so they grew up this way. And so we planted the seed, and I just hope, it's 2 kids. I have 50-50 chance. They'll continue with, but I see, they cheat, but I notice their cheating doesn't affect them as much as it used to in some ways, but so it's going to depend on the temperament of the child too. Like my daughter thinks she should be back in 1955 and we should all be making our own skin products. So I got that kid, which I think all that she's gone through really has, she's thinking about being a chiropractor now. She wants to, she's very sensitive. So she likes natural things. She's like, Mom, we could make our own conditioner. Why are we buying it? And so.
Wow. I've never heard of that.
Just like shea butter, coconut oil and shea butter, makes a really good conditioner.
Oh, wow.
So, and you could put it in your damp hair, and it prevents the flyaways, and it actually is shinier, and so she's all about essential oils, and so I think she'll be the one that stays on. My son on this autism spectrum now, he is on the fence. I will say he'll go to college, and I'm sure he'll eat the pizza, and I just hope he doesn't totally go to hell with himself, because he really did. So he does so much better without it. I could just see the fog, when he goes to a basketball game and he eats something he shouldn't have eaten, he comes home, he's just spacey. He just doesn't look okay. It's really weird. And I'm like, ew.
And that's where as parents, we have to let them learn those lessons, I guess.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. My daughter's like, I can have dairy. And then she has a little, and she's like, oh, my stomach hurts. I'm like, okay, thank you. Right.
What's harder is when it's not, you don't have an immediate negative reaction. It's hard to get buy-in for something that might happen a year more down the road. That's another struggle. And it's so individual, right? We can't say, oh, you should be gluten-free. That's not for everybody either.
And then I learned yesterday there's different types of gluten. So I didn't realize, like, you may have a sensitivity to, I don't know, some sort of gluten and not a sensitivity to another. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And some people say it's the glyphosate that we spray on the wheat. And I think that's true for some people too. Like it could just be the glyphosate that they're reacting to and not the gluten. But the gluten has changed. It's not the wheat of yesterday. So like where the wheat of yesterday used to actually have to like take a donut that was hard as a rock and dunk it in coffee to soften it. No one's doing that anymore because the gluten is the glue, which makes the pastry puffy and like Dunkin' Donuts to be delicious, right? Because it's added gluten, Jillian protein to it to make it more marketable. So it's that's causing this inflammation. So it is both, but I definitely think we've changed the wheat, and it's not the wheat that we used to have between the glyphosate and the protein structure of it. It's not the same. And so if you have pure barley, which is also considered gluten, but if you get barley from the plant, you might be fine with barley soup. Like you might not have a reaction to that. So.
Right. Oh my gosh, there's so many variables and everybody's different.
So many variables. And then dairy is horrible for people. It causes like a motility problem. You get constipated, you can't detox because you can't go to the bathroom. I mean, it's like, and that causes inflammation. And kids with autism, they show that when they test it, it's like the same as like an opioid reaction. They're having an opioid reaction to dairy, which you think about it, you're going to be constipated. You're going to be out of it. You're going to be ADD. So sometimes ADD symptoms is really a dairy sensitivity, gluten sensitivity, food sensitivity of any kind, and then add nutritional deficiencies, which we all probably have because of our lack of nutrients in the soil, our bad diets. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And it's just every disease could probably be healed with nutrients. So it's a vicious circle.
It is. And I think we're so far down the road with it. It's like, and we're so individual. Where do you start?
If people can afford testing, that's where it starts because we are bio-individual. So, somebody might be fine with gluten or might be nutritional deficiency isn't the problem. Or they might just be very vitamin B deficient. B vitamins are most important for brain health. We know this when we're pregnant, we're all supposed to take folic acid. Well, folic acid is a very synthetic form of folate that our body doesn't recognize.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yes. I've been on this path.
And we need methylated folate. Most of us have a genetic mutation, MTHFR, which prevents our bodies from metabolizing these things normally. So, two, is that an increase of autism among, brain? Like we always know, B equal brain. And, we all need B12 and we all need folate or folic acid for brain development. So, are we taking the wrong form of B?
Yes, that is so important. Once I learned about that genetic variant, the one that looks like mother effer, that one.
Yeah.
MTHFR.
FR, yeah.
I had all my kids tested because you need that knowledge, in my personal opinion. And it's almost like, I feel like when we have a baby, they should have a genetic panel so we know what we're working with.
Yeah, I do agree with that.
Well, and you call a geneticist, they don't believe in MTHFR or CMT or anything. They look for like the syndromes. They have their like list of 50 syndromes. And if they don't, the kids don't. So I don't know if that's not true so much now, but when my kids were little, I remember being like, I think they have some genetic mutations. And they looked at me like I had 10 heads when they mentioned the MTHFR mutation. Like, oh, that doesn't do anything.
So maybe that's seen as controversial or not really reliable.
Or not important. I mean, and the other one that's a close cousin to that is COMT. So COMT mutation is the one that regulates our hormones and our serotonin, our dopamine, and all of that. So that's important, especially when we talk about PANDAS too, because again, we blindly give people medication when we don't even know what their genetic markers are. So if you have a COMT, if you have a slow COMT or a fast COMT, it changes things. So my daughter has a slow COMT. So what that means is that, for example, if her estrogen goes too high during like puberty or whatever, she's a disaster. So we have to kind of help her reduce the amount of estrogen her dopamine's high, or serotonin's high. So dopamine and OCD are tied. So usually if you have OCD, your dopamine's too high, right? So what do they do with psychostimulant medication is they give you psychostimulant medication and it reuptakes the dopamine. So you give an anxious kid because you think they have ADD, an ADD med, and now you can create psychosis because they already have too much floating dopamine to start with. Where other kids are fast COMTs. So a fast COMT means that their neurotransmitters drop really quickly. Those kids are generally more ADD kids. Those kids are slow to get up in the morning, can't get going. When you test them, they're probably lower in dopamine because their brain's fastly dumping dopamine. So, and those kids are more prone to video game addiction and things that are going to make the dopamine receptors react. It's very, very fascinating. So there's a really good book called Dirty Genes by Ben Lynch, who is a naturopathic physician. And he speaks all about the different mutations that are very common in mental health, very common in health in general. He gives very, very specific like instructions, like if you have this mutation, you should be looking at your B vitamins and your methylation. If you have this, so it's very helpful. But then at the end of the book, he says, but don't treat just to the mutation because we have many others and we don't want to screw up the others. I'm like, well, which one is it? But it is helpful as like a roadmap.
I have one last question on that. And I think you summed it up, but I'm sitting here as a parent with a 5-year-old and I've just listened to this and I felt overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Right. Of all the things that could go on and not even knowing where to start, even pre any symptoms or anything. What should a parent do in the beginning to understand what's going on with their child? Or to lay out are there specific, 1, 2, 3 tests that they should look at so that they can have some predictive ability when they're looking at what may be going on with their kid?
Yeah. So if you can get to a regular doctor, we could start with a regular doctor and you could say, I suspect an inflammatory something going on. Could we do blood work? Now, some kids won't let you do blood work. PANDAS kids have a hard time, right? But if you can get your kids to do blood work, and just start with inflammation markers. Look at inflammation markers. And then because that at least clues a doctor in to say, oh, yeah, the SED rate's a little high for a 5-year-old.
What's the SED rate?
So SED rate is like the inflammatory marker. Like it's like 1 in 100, 1 in 560, and you could tell because again, we all have some inflammation, but like if someone's fighting off Epstein-Barr, they're going to have their SED rate's going to be pretty high. So a regular blood work could look at things like Epstein-Barr, and you can say, hey, can we test for Epstein-Barr titers? Could we test for mycoplasma pneumonia titers? Could we look for Lyme disease? Now, Western blot Lyme disease tests aren't always the most accurate, but you know what? If insurance is going to pay for that test, and let's humor us and let's just do some of those general tests and see what we find. I always recommend a vitamin D test too, if insurance will cover it, because D is very important for our immune system. And if it's too low, we really need to get that up right away. A general metabolic test. They could also look for things like methylation. It depends how versed the doctor is though, and what else or could we look for.
Yeah.
If you could find a naturopath that is licensed in your state, they're much more like they might take 17 vials of blood. Or send you for 17 vials, where a regular MD will send you for 5.
Yeah.
So they're going to look deeper. But if you can find a doctor that's at least open-minded, that's where I would really start.
Can you go to your doctor and say, I would like this test, and this test?
Yeah. Like I'm suspecting some autoimmune stuff. My child was sick a month or 2 ago. I'm wondering if maybe we missed a strep infection. Oh, strep is the other one. Could we run some tests? Because after like the 2-week incubation period, you can do a swab and be negative for strep, but it's in your gut, it's in your body. And what will show up is IgM or IgG markers. So IgM is a current infection. IgG is a past infection. So if they find a past infection, that could be creating havoc anyway. So just because it's a past infection doesn't mean that it's not still hanging out in our body and causing inflammation if our body's unable to knock it out. But it will give markers as far as like where to start the treatment. Then the question is, will the doctor know what to do? The doctor might say you have mycoplasma pneumonia, which happened with Elena. Everything seemed to light up post-COVID, by the way. So if you get COVID and you go to the doctor, you will have everything. Just saying. Because again, we all have these things in us. So what's lighting up will depend on you. But it's a good indication, at least to start going down that road, is to really understand and get the confirmation that yes, there's something going on. If you can get to a functional medicine doctor person, they may recommend a stool sample. And that will look at your microbiome, your gut inflammation. And again, if there's gut inflammation, there's brain inflammation. So that's the second test that's helpful. Another test that could be really helpful, although a lot of people don't want to do it, is a food sensitivity test. Because if you are sensitive to 13 things, then we know there's inflammation, because your body wouldn't be reacting to 13 things. The goal is to get the inflammation down, redo the test eventually, and maybe reintroduce half those foods again, because once you heal the gut, you might be able to welcome some of those things back into your diet and not without a problem.
Jennifer, I've got several 20-something-year-olds in my life that I'm close to that have mental health symptoms and then a lot of autoimmune system issues and other things. Can you explain, because in case I want to explain this to them, what is the relationship, again, to autoimmune processes and inflammatory processes and mental health?
So our immune system protects us, or should be protecting us from pathogens and things like that. And when it's malfunctioning, the body on overload will cause an inflammatory reaction. So the immune system should regulate itself better, but it's not. And it can cause high glutamates, high histamines, and inflammation. And it could be silent. So that's the problem too, is you don't necessarily know you're inflamed.
Right.
Some people get physical symptoms like joint pain or headaches, but some people it's pretty silent. So they might just have anxiety, and sometimes they have stomach aches, and people live with their stomach aches thinking it's normal. And I remember when I stopped doing gluten, dairy, and egg, when Elena was 6 years old, when we first discovered she had some food sensitivities, she was like, oh my God, I didn't know my stomach wasn't supposed to hurt. Oh. I was like, poor thing. I was like, yeah, honey, no. But she lived with that her entire life. And so picky eating is another sign that the autoimmune system is in trouble, or that the gut is in trouble, digestive system. So when I said it's metabolic, immunologic, and digestive, the digestive system is very much involved in this. And kids intuitively know when they don't want to eat something because it bothers them. And so some kids will eat more of it because they get other, like sugar and things like that. And sugar feeds yeast that in the gut will ferment. And what is sugar and yeast connect? What is combined? What does that cause? What's sugar and yeast together?
Beer.
Alcohol. No alcohol. So Natasha McBride, who is a psychiatrist / MD, I think, she came up with the GAPS diet and things like that. And she talks about this syndrome in children, that they have an alcoholic behavior. They have bad coping skills, bad executive functioning skills, because their yeast and sugars are fermenting and causing an alcoholic effect.
Wow.
And if not treated, they could become alcoholics later, because alcoholism is actually sugar addiction. And when you take alcohol away from addicts in a rehab, they all jump to sugar immediately because it's the same thing. Interesting, right?
Alcoholism is a sugar addiction?
It's basically a sugar addiction. And very often, if they can address it biochemically and they can address the yeast in their gut, because we all have yeast in our gut. But if it's on overdrive, if we have too much bad yeast and not enough good, if we have too much bad bacteria, it's going to be hungry for sugar. So again, a lot of kids eat carbs and sugar and keep feeding this vicious cycle. And then their stomach's inflamed, and then they don't want to eat real food. So that happens. And then when you're inflamed, you don't want to eat vegetables, because vegetables are very hard on your gut. So they're already in pain. They're already addicted to sugar. They have very inflammation going on. They have brain fog. They have ADD. They have, PANDAS symptoms, autistic symptoms. And we really need to take a look at that. So, diet is a lot too. and what we're feeding and, all of that. So that's another whole rabbit hole. But usually, like, it seems so overwhelming, but what you realize is it's really the same thing. We want to reduce inflammation. So what do we do to redo that?
Thanks for saying that. Okay.
We look at our diets. What are we eating that's causing inflammation? Sugar. It lowers our immune system response, number one, and it causes inflammation. Are we eating whole food vegetable stuff, or are we eating processed food? Processed food is going to cause inflammation. So if people do nothing else, go to no doctor, spend no money on anything except looking at their diets, looking at their pantry, that's where you start. We have to recognize that we are being bombarded with chemicals and we are being bombarded with toxins. And we have to do our due diligence as human beings on this earth right now in this time frame. We have to do things to detox ourselves and not introduce more toxins into our lives. If we can do that and just look at it from that framework, that's all of it. Now, when we look at PANDAS specifically, since that's our topic today, we also want to take a look at the pathogens that could be causing inflammation. So again, it's looking at the root cause of the inflammation. Once you start looking at the inflammation, you start looking at, well, what else is causing it?
Yeah.
So that's really what it is. We want to just reduce the toxic load,
right,
to reduce the inflammation. And that's the whole thing. If we talked for almost an hour and a half, we could talk about it for 3 hours and 10 hours.
Can we schedule in the next hour and a half now?
There's so much good information.
Yeah.
I know. But yes. My website, by the way, is Healing Without Hurting. And I have a really good article on PANDAS. And I also, at the bottom of the article, I did last February, I want to say, I did a 2-hour class on this and everything we're talking about, but very specific, much more detail, and all the remedies that I use for my kids and all of that. And so it's available on there.
Oh, that would be great.
And so if any of your listeners are interested in really digging deeper into what can I do with my kid right now, that might be something to look into. So
perfect. Jennifer, thank you.
You're welcome.
So you have such
I know too much, more than I want to know.
Yeah. And so generous of you to share all of that because, that's really special. I know a lot of times we can't get this much information at once. Gosh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for tuning in to today's conversation. To join our community and access more valuable resources, please visit our website at thiswayuppodcast.com.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this with a friend. And to stay connected, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Listen to This Way Up.